back and bigger than ever. It's the unofficial 40 from Soonerscoop.com. Now, here's the entire Sooner Scoop crew. Carrie, Josh, Eddie, and Bob.
Hello and welcome to a special edition of the unofficial 40. Eddie Radosevich joined alongside Josh McCutchin as well as Bob Przybylo. Gentlemen, good evening. It has been a tremendous day for the Oklahoma football program as they pick up what was, I guess in a way, has been the worst kept secret out there of all time. Caleb Williams officially committing to Oklahoma, the highest ranked commitment since Adrian Peterson in 2004. And guys, I guess this is just kind of the culmination of quite a few months leading down this road. Just your overall thoughts now that it is officially official. Caleb Williams is an Oklahoma Sooner.
You know, I don't know about for Bob, but for me, it's such a strange feeling because you're talking about the number 3 player in the country. This is a huge deal at the game's most premier position, all these things. I mean, this should be everything, but there is a feeling of where you're like, you know, we knew this was coming. It's here now, but it really is. I mean, like, you want to move past that and focus on what Oklahoma is getting here. And, you know, when I've looked at him and watched Caleb on tape, this is a guy that really, in a lot of ways, combines a lot of the best traits of Oklahoma's 3 previous Heisman finalists and, 2 Heisman winners in that group. You know, you've got the ad-lib creativity of Baker Mayfield. You've got that just scary athleticism of Kyler Murray. And at the same time, you have that big, more athletic type like a Jalen Hurts. I mean, Caleb is much closer to physically being Jalen than he is Kyler, but he has that explosive, running ability that Kyler brought to the table. So this is a huge deal for Oklahoma. And for me, just being, I think, it's safe to say kind of the football nerd of the podcast, I can't wait to see what Lincoln Riley chooses to do with Caleb Williams, how he builds this around him.
It's interesting because we all know it's the worst kept secret, right? But when it's that long, you almost start to wonder if there's going to be a hiccup, if something's going to go wrong. And instead, it went off as planned. And as much as maybe people were hoping for even more things to get this to go, as when it was like 4 months in the making, that says a lot. Because we can go back 22nd eyes. Those were Caleb Williams. And March 23rd, he released the top 5. I remember telling you guys, is he going to commit through his blog tomorrow? Is that how he's going to do it? And, of course, that didn't ended up being the case. But when you can go that long and still keep your plans intact and then do all the sort of work behind the scenes that we know he's done, this is a huge win. And now we kind of see how good, how big this class can really get.
And, of course, the fireworks, I think that have been hinted at for the 4th of July weekend has always been something bigger than Caleb Williams. And that is, of course, the case. As everybody knows now, Latrell McCutchin has joined the Oklahoma class as well. And, I think that in a way, Josh, this is one of those wins for Oklahoma on the defensive side of the football that you can really start pointing towards maybe they're turning the corner.
Absolutely. I mean, and that's what sticks out to me about this. It's not just, okay, you landed a guy in Austin, you landed a guy that's a top 100 player. This is a guy, I mean, for people that are listening at home, go look at his offer list. I mean, you're talking Alabama, Ohio State, Georgia, Florida, LSU, all the guys that we all say, that get to have the DBU arguments. They're all there, and they all wanted this guy. And Oklahoma, led by Roy Manning, and really – there's a lot of times when you can say, oh, there's a lot of people that had an impact on this, and that's true in McCutchin's case. But when you talk to him about the thing that really sold him on Oklahoma, he talked about his relationship with Roy Manning and how key that was. And just feeling like Roy Manning cared about him as a person, and they developed a relationship that was a lot more than just player coach. And so I think you have to, really give a lot of credit. And I think, Eddie, you're dead on. This could be a moment that 3 or 4 years from now we look back and say, yeah, everybody was talking about Caleb Williams, but this may be the moment when defensive players, particularly in the state of Texas, started to say, I don't have to go, I don't have to leave the conference that's most affiliated with my state. I could stay right here, play in the Big 12, play 2 or 3 home games a year in my home state, or not home games, but, play games in my home state,
Sure.
let my family see them, and I can do that all at Oklahoma and compete, in the playoffs for national titles. So it's going to, we don't know. You don't want to make too much of one commitment, but this could be something that Oklahoma really uses to their advantage to go recruit other elite defensive guys.
Yeah, and
I am going to make too much of it because I think these are the type of battles they don't win 3-4 years ago. And we talked about that defensive line with like Perrion Winfrey and Ronnie Perkins. And now when you put Bryson Washington last year, you put Latrell McCutchin for this year's class, when you start winning those battles you had no business winning, then you see the product change on the field, and then all of a sudden you become a legitimate target for every single person and not just every single top offensive recruit in the country. You start producing at a high level with what Alex Grinch is looking to do. And because you're winning these battles, all of a sudden anyone that has a OU offer is legitimately in play. And that's how quickly things can change. So I'm overreaching maybe, but I feel like because a Alabama commit, this isn't like someone that OU just kind of fell into their lap as like a plan B, plan C type of target. This is the best of the best. And it's sort of interesting that Lincoln Riley was able to get Caleb Williams and McCutchin on campus before the coronavirus really took hold of the entire nation. I mean, he was able to get them in that first week of March, and who knows just how big getting those guys in that one final time really ended up playing throughout this process.
I think the most logical question is for most fans out there now is what is next? You talk about Caleb Williams and Latrell McCutchin being in, and I think that everybody is kind of sitting there wanting more. Where do they go from here? How do you build off such a big weekend?
Well, I think you've got to look at the guys. I mean, because we've all talked about it forever on the podcast. What is Caleb Williams going to bring to the table as a recruiter? Well, you've got all these guys where you talk about, Emeka Egbuka, Jalil Farouk, Kelvin Gilliam, Tristan Lee, all these elite guys that Oklahoma has really been involved with, but maybe I would say other than probably Farouk, has never really felt like a leader for. Well, that can change now. I mean, now Caleb Williams is out there. He can publicly be involved with this. He can really try, I'm going to rally all the OU fans that follow me, whatever it may be, however he comes at this. But speaking, I had a chance to speak with his coach, and we'll have a story on that in the very near future. But it is interesting to hear him talk, because the first thing he talked about with Caleb was how engaging he is, how well he relates to the players around him. He's done it since he was a sophomore at Gonzaga, when he was the young guy on a team that ended up winning a championship on a Hail Mary throw from Caleb Williams. So there are a lot of interesting things there, and I think he is a guy that is not going to be one of the players that we say, man, it seemed like he was making a lot of connections. It seemed like things were happening there. This is a guy that legitimately could bring in some recruits that OU wasn't going to get otherwise.
Go ahead, Bob.
And now we can stop talking like the if scenario. Now it's, okay, he's here. What's going to happen? What sort of dominoes are going to fall? Like, we've been building up for months and months. Well, once Caleb Williams is in the bag, now you're going to see it. And finally, we can stop playing that role of saying, well, you still have to wait for Caleb to make his call before you get a real feel of what's going to go on here. And then what we're going to understand is whether or not he resonated as much as we all thought. Because I've said time and time again on radio, on the pod, that this is the best recruiter I've ever seen, because he stretches beyond everything. He stretches beyond his region with the East Coast, stretches beyond his position group, like the receivers and things of that nature. He goes to the defense, and he goes to the names that you thought were pipe dreams to OU before. Now they're realistic targets just because he's there. Now we're going to learn if there's real truth to that, or does OU actually end up falling short for all these kids that Caleb was going for? And it turns out, as great as it was to get them, maybe the impact isn't as big as everyone had first hoped.
How hard did Lincoln Riley have to work on this recruiting job as far as Caleb Williams goes? I mean, even going back to when Brock Vandegrift decommitted, they only had the 2 offers out there, and it seemed like the eyes immediately went to Caleb Williams in Oklahoma's pursuit. How tough of a job do you think that Lincoln Riley did? He obviously has a lot to sell in the quarterback room. I think everybody knows that. But, kind of deeper inside the recruitment of Caleb Williams, I wonder how much convincing he actually had to do. Or is this going to become the norm for Lincoln Riley? He's going to go out and get the number 1 quarterback in the country every year.
I don't know that you can put that sort of expectation on it, but I mean, I don't think there's any question that whether Oklahoma lands the number 1 quarterback in the country every year, they're going to get a legit look from the number 1 quarterback in the country next year. Because I mean, we can already start talking now that Caleb has made his decision to Quinn Ewers in the 2022 class that has a very legitimate chance at South Lake Carroll in Dallas to be that guy next year. And most people feel Oklahoma is the clear leader right now. Now we will have to see what impact Caleb Williams has on his decision. But there's no question. I mean, I think if all things were equal, Quinn Ewers would probably be headed to Oklahoma. So we'll have to see where things go. But, yeah, this was a huge job by Lincoln Riley. I think people have forgotten, and I remember us talking about it on the podcast, how weird it was that with Brock Vandegrift committed, Caleb Williams came out to Oklahoma anyway, took that visit. And I know, talking to some people, it made Brock Vandegrift and his family a little uncomfortable. They thought maybe Oklahoma was, recruiting both or thinking about taking 2. And that was never the plan. Oklahoma was very solid to Brock Vandegrift. And I think Oklahoma did a great job after the fact, after they lost Brock, of explaining to Caleb, hey, man, we were loyal to our guy. He'd made his choice. We stuck by him. You get on board with us, we're going to be the same way to you. You are our guy. You're the only player we want now. We're focused on you. And I think that's how they packaged that and made that okay, because that could have gone really badly to the point when they tried to come back where he's like, no, I think I'm good here. So, like I said, they did a really, really good job of just engaging him in the conversation in the way they presented it. I mean, they made it very clear why they had done what they had done and made up ground, because when they lost Brock, I would have given them a 5% chance of landing Caleb Williams, and now they've been the leader for 4 months now.
It's interesting you go with the OU direction, because I actually go with the Caleb one. This is a kid that didn't, get bitter about not being the 1A choice. If OU takes Brock Vandegrift, he doesn't close the door. He's still open toward what's going on. And then when Brock leaves, he's not like laughing at OU saying, ha, 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 you could have had me, but you chose to go the other direction, and now it's too late. So you give credit clearly to what Lincoln Riley and what that staff was able to do throughout that whole process in terms of massaging egos and keeping a balance. But Caleb Williams showing some real long-term perspective to not get all riled up about a short-term decision, to where that door was kept open. And after Joe Brady left LSU, it almost became tough to try to figure out another spot that he could land that wasn't OU. I still would have loved if Joe Brady would have stayed with the Tigers, had Joe Brady versus Lincoln Riley. I think that would have been a recruiting matchup for the ages. But once Brady left, and it's like, man, Lincoln Riley has done this right. Caleb kept the open mind. This sounds like it's all going to come together. It's just a matter of time.
And it seems like right now that it is kind of going to be the beginning of a trickle-down effect. We talked about it on the unofficial 40 as far as, what this month could mean to Oklahoma on the recruiting trail. What is their biggest focus now as they start shaping this group together? It kind of feels like it's a closer, tighter knit group now that they have a quarterback, now that they have kind of a point person as far as the recruiting class goes in 2021. What is the biggest focus now as they kind of put this class together and it starts taking real transformation here over the next few months?
To me, I think there are several areas you can go, because there's, other than quarterback, I don't think there's one position where you say, yep, Oklahoma's work's done there, they're good. So, I mean, there's a lot of variety. But to me, I think you look at the offensive line where some of Oklahoma's biggest names are: Bryce Foster, Tristan Lee. you kind of focus on those guys and see what Oklahoma can build around Caleb. And, when Caleb won the Elite 11, two of the first people to congratulate him, Bryce Foster and Tristan Lee. That's not a bad sign. So we'll see how that goes. But, I mean, that as a quarterback and being the smart kid that he is, that's where he's going to focus his attention. Another is, really what's going to happen at running back. Who's going to be in the backfield with Caleb Williams in this class? I think we all really like where OU is with Kamar Wheaton. I mean, maybe really like is overstating it, but I think Oklahoma's is in as good a shape as anybody involved in his recruitment, whether it's SMU, LSU, Texas. I don't see him getting that far. So I think those four are probably the schools that are most realistic in his option list. So we'll have to watch that. And then defensively, I mean, we talked about Latrell McCutchin. Can Oklahoma start to lean a little bit on Prophet Brown and say, okay, man, we know we're high on your list. There's been a lot of talk that he's close to a decision. Does Oklahoma say, hey, we need you to get on board, or we may have to take another guy and then you won't have a spot? It's going to be interesting to see how numbers play out. And that's what we always talk about. All these things cause chain reactions, not just Caleb Williams jumping on board and then, okay, everybody has, they know where he's going. It's scholarship spots. Okay, we only have this many available spots. Well, okay, now Isaiah Coe is clearly kind of part of the class. Well, what do they do with Marcus Burris and Kelvin Gilliam? There's a lot of things that, depending on how big the next few days are following the 4th, there can be a lot of movement in a lot of recruitments, and it could happen really fast, in my opinion.
I guess my biggest question is, does OU start pushing? Do they start leaning on kids and saying, you can't make any visits? The dead period stretched through August 31st. I think we're starting to come to grips that perhaps you're going to go an entire recruiting cycle without real official visits and things of that nature. So if you want to be a Sooner, then let's go ahead and start getting it done. Like, there's no reason that OU can't do we sort of laughed about, what Tennessee, what North Carolina, USC, schools like that have done during pandemic. But it's about that time where OU does the same thing. Instead of planting the seeds and building the relationship, it's time to start closing. It's time to start making this class as good as we all think it can be. And that's why I'm sort of curious to see if there's any push by OU, and then if there's any blowback in terms of the recruit saying, hey, I'm not ready. Don't try to make me go in that direction just yet.
Bob, you've been the resident eyeball expert. What do you make of I guess the new emoji out there is just the O. Have we put together what this really means?
No, we haven't. But there was one theory that a Twitter follower gave to me at 3 a.m. So this person was really thinking about it.
I'm sure that was well thought out.
Is that it's a link in the chain, because it's link up 21. So the O's are actually links in the chain, because if you go back to when last Monday, when they all happened, which was Latrell McCutchin, which we can now say, it was all the commits that did it, because they're the first links in the chain, and they're saying, here comes the next one. But it might be time to say goodbye to the I's, because now the I's are done. Latrell McCutchin was March 1st. He was those I's. Caleb Williams was March 22nd. He was those. There's none since that point lately. During the last week, it's been the O, been the link, however you want to phrase it. So I think, on the Sooner Scoop board, I'm going to have to update the title to the Tracking Eyes /link thread here, because that feels like it should become the new thing. The curious thing will be is if there's a 2022 kid that ever makes the call, is it still the link up chain, or does it become something different? And I know that's something that only nerds like myself are really curious to know how it actually goes, how it actually plays out.
Josh, is that kind of what you're subscribing to as well?
Yeah, I mean, it's what makes sense. And I can tell you that it'll be interesting to see when that one kind of comes to light, because there is no question that news happened on Thursday night, and it's impossible not to make that connection. I mean, I think Bob's absolutely right. So we'll just have to see, is that the new method, and why did it change? I don't know any of that. That's what's going to be interesting.
Jansen Dunn.
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, like, but did Jansen Dunn just like, we're like, well, that emoji, we got to put that to bed. Like, I mean, like, I don't know why that is the way it is. Like, maybe they like the O better because clearly that's kind of a representative of Oklahoma. I don't know, but that's going to be interesting to see if that is a permanent staple and if they've made any changes to it. Like, okay, we're going to tweet this out because we know you're going in the next week, or we know you're going in the next few days, or we know the date that you're like, if there are any parameters for it, or if it's just the same setup with just a different emoji.
Something that we touched on in the scoop on Friday morning was Keon Coleman's situation, and it's kind of a curious situation to how this has played out, isn't it?
It really is, and Bob will have to back me on some of this because there is a basketball component to Keon Coleman's decision. He is a guy that wants to play two sports. From what I understand, and again, Bob could tell us more, is a very accomplished basketball player, is very good. And that's really why Kansas has made it into his final three along with Oklahoma and South Carolina. Now, we can say he was a guy that we expected to happen today. We thought that announcement was going to happen on Saturday. And what I was told is that on Thursday and maybe a little earlier in the week, Coleman started to kind of sound alarm bells, like maybe he wanted to pull it back, maybe he wasn't quite ready to decide. And I don't think Oklahoma was willing to put some other players on the back burner to continue to wait on Coleman. And that's not to say they don't like him. They think he's a very good player. But I think there are other guys they see similarly. And they, like I said, once you get commitments, you can start to really start shaping your class and have a better idea. When you only have a few, there's so many directions it can go and so many places. But if you start having a clear picture, then you can go to these other guys and say, hey, we've got one receiver spot left, or we've got one, DB spot left. We want you to be that guy, and we're going to give you first chance to say no, but you need to, it's time. Either you're on board or you're not. If you leave that open, then you lose all ability, because if you try that same argument and then take a kid at the same position later, the guy that you strong-armed is going to know that he kind of got ran around, and it could hurt, it could hurt your whole relationship. So they've got to be careful of stuff like that. But like I said, I'm hearing Kansas, and I think people are going to be like, Kansas over Oklahoma. You got to take the basketball thing into it. That's a big part of this equation. And I think with a player that is as raw as Keon Coleman is, if his focus isn't almost 100% football, it's tough for me to see him playing at a level that Oklahoma will need him to.
Here's what I can't answer. I don't know where Keon Coleman stood or stands in terms of KU basketball. I don't know where the value is in terms of what the Jayhawks see in him. I can say from OU and talking to sources Thursday night, they were much more involved and they were way more excited about Nathan Rollins-Kabonge and his commitment because of his 6'7" size. Because OU basketball, even if there's been some complaints, guard play usually isn't where it's coming from. And 6'4", I mean, that's a tall receiver. There's no doubt about that. But you put 6'4" on the basketball court, and that's like a run-of-the-mill, shooting guard or something of that nature. And OU hasn't had much issue trying to recruit that position, where they have had issues trying to get legitimate guys in the post. So there's no doubt that Nathan, the OU basketball staff, really sounds like they pushed hard to try to make sure he was on board, where Keon would have felt like a nice add-on, but not exactly a huge necessity. It wasn't someone that they were going to go to war with to try to make it happen. So that's odd that it almost feels like in terms of football and basketball, Keon Coleman was a priority, but maybe not a top-tier one for either sport.
Regardless, it would seem like Oklahoma's in a really good position at wide receiver, just for the facts that are obvious out there. Who wants to come play with Caleb Williams? And they can now say that after today's news. It's been a big day, guys, for Oklahoma. Obviously, we have plenty of coverage on Soonerscoop.com. Any lasting thoughts on kind of the fireworks that were for today?
Well, for me, I've got two things, and obviously just a huge day for Oklahoma. This is the momentum start that we all thought maybe could start back when Mario Williams and Clayton Smith made their announcement. I think now you start to see this. I don't think this is the end of big news in July. I think they're going to have some more players jump on board, and you're going to start to see Oklahoma start to roll a little bit like you saw maybe Ohio State in the spring or kind of North Carolina over the last couple months. It may not be all in one day, but I think over the month of July you're going to see several jump on board. The only other thing I also wanted to say is this is the first podcast we've done since the news on the board. Just wanted to express our sadness and the loss of Woofy, one of our longtime board members, a great, great guy, just loved by everybody. I said it yesterday, probably the first time ever on the board I've been kind of brought to tears. Like just a good guy that meant a lot to a lot of people, and it was sad to see him go.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think that just a final comment as well from myself as far as Woofy goes. I think that it's kind of cool, not cool in these moments, but very appreciative, I guess, of the community that is the Crimson Corner. As far as I know, people like giving each other shit out there, but to see it kind of come together when times are low like they are right now, it's always a good reminder that it is a community, and we're certainly going to miss him. I know that I didn't have the relationship that you and Carrie did with Wolfie, and him being as big as part of the board as long as he has been, but it's very apparent that he will be tremendously missed. Gentlemen, it's been a good emergency podcast. Thank you for joining. We'll have plenty of coverage here in the remaining days here as we move forward with Oklahoma's 2021 class, but a big one today with the commitment of five-star quarterback Caleb Williams as well as cornerback Latrell McCutchin. We'll be back on Wednesday for a regularly scheduled unofficial 40.